This is Radio Boston. I'm Tiziana Deering, and it's Friday, which means we take some time to dive beneath the headlines on one of the major stories of the week. And this week, we are digging into Ballot Question 1 with an informal debate. Today's conversation is hosted by WBUR, the Boston Globe, and WCVB. And there are several ways you can follow along today, aside from listening on WBUR 90.9 FM. We're also broadcasting a video feed of today's event. You can go to WBUR.org, bostonglobe.com, or WCVB.com to watch. Now, just as we did with Question 4, we reached out to the official Yes on One and No on One campaigns to book guests for today's debate. They both responded. Here representing the Yes side of Question 1, Andrew Farnetano, who is Communications Director for Yes on One, and representing the No side of Question 1, Dan Sensi, spokesperson for No on One. Okay, so I'm going to set the table quickly here. Question 1 deals with the Fair Share Amendment, or the millionaire's tax. Essentially, right now, everyone in Massachusetts pays 5% income tax, no matter how much they make. A yes vote on Question 1 would alter the state constitution to add an additional 4% tax on any income in a given year over $1 million. A no vote would keep the 5% flat tax rate we have now for everyone. So we're going to get started. And we're going to break this conversation into 3 categories. We're going to do some stuff on direct economic impact. We'll do some stuff on intended and unintended consequences. And then we'll do some stuff on fairness. And I'm going to try to guide us through, so if you can kind of stay in those buckets as we go along. All right. With no further ado, Andrew, first question to you. We're going to do economic impact first. The state had a surplus of more than $2 billion this past fiscal year. That's in addition to the nearly $3 billion the state will be returning in some way to taxpayers. So why do we need a new tax at all?
Relying on one-time surpluses and short-term funding is how our transportation system and our education system got in the mess that they're in. Our state has 644 structurally deficient bridges that are in need of repair. The T is forced to shut down to make what should be regular maintenance repairs. Our schools have leaky roofs and windows that don't open and class sizes that are too large. We need a long-term sustainable source of revenue to fund these things year after year, not just in economic good times, but in economic bad times. And that's what Question 1 will help provide.
So Dan, Massachusetts Budget and Policy Center did publish a report about those 644 bridges. They were listed as structurally deficient. There are more than 200 additionally listed as in an unknown condition. This is earmarked. This is money earmarked for education, public transportation, roads, and bridges. All stuff we can use. So
Certainly.
Why not do a new tax?
Absolutely. And educational spending, transportation investment are very admirable ideas and notions, ones that we should pursue wholeheartedly. Unfortunately, this ballot amendment, were it to pass, will not increase funding in either of those tranches.
Why?
Because constitutionally, it says subject to appropriation. 2 years ago, this ballot question was thrown out by the SJC because an attempt to direct the funding and the increase funding was thrown out as not constitutional. So they came back, altered the language, and had it, this is what passed muster. But what happens, the way our Constitution was written, we have a flat tax and we have a bicameral system where the legislature decides where funding goes. It appropriates the money. And they decide by doing an assessment of the Commonwealth where the needs are, where they're assessing where the interests are of the Commonwealth and where the funding should go. So yes, the actual dollars raised were this to be put in place would go towards education, would go towards transportation, but it would not increase funding in either of those areas $1.
It absolutely would. Look, the leaders in the legislature, Attorney General Maura Healey, have all agreed that passing Question 1 will mean more money for education and transportation. And it's just common sense. When you look at our cities and towns, when you look at our transportation system, they all need more revenue. They all need more funding for schools and roads and bridges and public transportation. There's no other way that we're going to pay for this other than asking the middle class to pay more unless we pass Question 1 in November.
So Andrew Farnetano, Communications Director for Yes on One, I'll stay with you to follow up on that. It is often a concern when policy is passed that will add money to a line, to a particular cause, that what might happen is the legislature might instead replace money. Okay, so we've got $1 billion coming in on education. Great. We'll take $1 billion that we were already spending on education. Now we can spend it on something else. So where is your confidence, or how do you respond to criticism that this will just replace money? We won't see more spending on education, public transit, roads, and bridges.
The Question One campaign is backed by tens of thousands of teachers and bus drivers and other workers, public and private employees all over the state who are working hard to pass this. We wouldn't be so focused on passing this question if we didn't believe that the funding would reach the classroom and reach our roads and our public transportation system. That's why we're in this fight. We're doing this to make our tax system fairer so that the very, very rich pay a little bit more, and we're doing it to invest in transportation and education.
And we will come back to fairness a little later. I want to stay on economic impact. Turning back to you, Dan Sensi, who's a spokesperson for No on One. Evan Horowitz is the executive director of the Center for State Policy Analysis, which is at Tufts University. We had him on yesterday sort of just breaking down their analysis. They did the analysis on this. Here is Evan talking about the fact that the center estimated that somewhere between 30 and 70% of the money taken in through the tax would actually lead to additional spending in those target areas. So here he is.
You can't really guarantee you're going to see additional spending. Having said that, we've looked into this, because just because you can't guarantee it doesn't mean it won't happen. And looking back at other kind of earmarked similar cases, it does seem like kind of roughly half of this money will lead to additional spending in the targeted areas.
Okay, so if you look at a swing from 30% to 70%, right, the median, the middle part is 50%. 50% of $1.3 billion, which is their estimate for how much this would generate year over year in revenue, again, not unmeaningful. How can you be so sure it won't go where it's supposed to go?
Yeah, I mean, and that's their analysis to where that is, and I think the operative words there are how he started it, that it won't guarantee. Let's go back to the cover of the Boston Globe last week. Legislators were asked, if this were passed, how would you spend the money? And a number of them, Chairman of Ways and Means included, said, can't guarantee anything, in great big quotes there. They assess the needs of the Commonwealth every year. And there are advocates in environmental affairs, there are advocates in social services, there are advocates in healthcare that would love to have a considerable amount of more funding to come their way as well. All noble endeavors, all things we should invest in,
so
all will be pulling at the pie.
What about that straight from the horse's mouth?
It's not up to them. This is a constitutional amendment. It's not a regular law that the legislature can choose to change. This is a binding constitutional amendment that can only be changed by another vote of the people. And so when we pass this in November, that restriction that the money raised must be spent on education and transportation would be binding on the legislature. They would be required to follow it.
So why is that not enough? I mean, that is
because
binding.
It's 1.2 billion, 2 billion, 900 million, whatever it is, that's going to fluctuate because of the nature of the economy and how the taxes that are generated here, and capital gains and others fluctuate wildly relative to the economy. So it's not a stable gain. But also, we spent over $15 billion in these areas last year. So yes, the money will go in, but it's never going to be enough. And the monies that go in can be replaced by others. There's no question about that.
It'll be more than we have today.
It won't be, actually, not to be argumentative, Tiziana, but there's no guarantee to that whatsoever. And as many times as you analyze it, and as many times as you want to try to say that it will, there is zero guarantee, because the legislature will appropriate the monies they see fit in education. In educational spending, we are 6th in the nation right now per pupil. We're 3rd in the nation in test scores. It's an allocation issue, I agree. We could have other schools do better across the Commonwealth, but it's not a funding issue. And the legislature will allocate the monies that they see fit, but they do not have to increase 1 cent in either of these two areas.
Okay, so that's back to the argument, and Andrew, you and I have talked about that already, about the additive, where we know that the Center for Budget and Policy Analysis, for State Policy Analysis, is saying estimate 30 to 70%, and Dan, you're saying no guarantee there. So I want to hit two things here, and then we're going to move on. So first, I just want to note, it is a piece of the ballot measure that in future years, this is pegged to cost of living, which means we're starting at $1 million now, and this is just for our listeners to understand how this proposal works. Right. In future years, that number would actually, the threshold number would go up to track with cost of living. And the second thing, I was looking in the Center for State Policy Analysis report, there is an argument in there that actually we will see not super consistent, but consistent revenues year over year in this. So I just want to hit those two facts for our listeners. I'm going to reset us here, and then I'm going to move us into the second subject for our debate. So you're listening to a debate on ballot question 1, one of 4 ballot questions Massachusetts voters will weigh in on in this election cycle. Question 1 deals with the Fair Share Amendment or the millionaire's tax. A yes vote would create an additional 4% tax, but only on annual income over $1 million in a given year. And a no vote would keep the flat tax rate of 5% for everyone that we have now. Here representing the yes side of question 1, Andrew Farnitano, who is a communications director for Yes on 1. Representing the no side, Dan Sensi, spokesperson for No on 1. Today's conversation is brought to you by WBUR, the Boston Globe, and WCVB. And in addition to listening to this debate on WBUR 90.9 FM, you can also watch a video stream. You can go to WBUR.org, bostonglobe.com, or WCVB.com to watch. So I'm going to move us now into some questions around intended and unintended consequences. Andrew, over to you. One of the arguments that the no side has made is that this could lead to high earners either leaving the state or working the system to hide more money. And the Center for State Policy Analysis has argued more likely the latter, not a lot of people leaving the state, but a lot of people who can have the resources sheltering that money. And in fact, this $1.3 billion estimate of the revenues is a discount of $670 million because of that ability to hide the money. So any concerns about driving big money out of the state, out of the tax base, in favor of 2 priorities versus the whole spending of the Commonwealth?
No. The federal taxes are much higher than state taxes. If a high-income person already has an incentive to work with their accountant and reduce their taxable income, they're doing that already. There's no reason that they would do that in any additional way due to this tax. And we would be doing the same thing that many other similar states, California, New Jersey, New York, Minnesota, all have high tax rates, higher than we would have here in Massachusetts on income over $1 million, and they haven't seen these types of problems that are being threatened.
So, Dan, even with an estimate that some percentage of families do move out, there's a $670 million potential price tag of loss of revenues. On the flip side, what about this idea that economists might call positive externalities, which is you're investing in transit, transportation, education, which grows prosperity at the lower level of the tax base, turns more people potentially into high earners. Is there an argument to be made here? What's your response to the idea that this is sort of a prevention measure, right?
Yeah.
Which is to increase our prosperity overall, and if a few families leave, short-term loss for long-term gain.
Sure. So many things to unpack there. And I hate to be a broken record, but there's not going to be any increased funding in transportation or education. So the premise that would go towards that end, I believe, is a false one. Second, we're already one of the most expensive states in the Commonwealth, in the nation, to do business. And we're losing people. The Mass Taxpayers Foundation has done studies that say we're losing upwards of $2 to $3 billion a year already each year. Given COVID, given the change in the workplace, the work from home mentality, and the new structure that businesses are creating here, it's much easier for high earners to go to New Hampshire, to domicile in Florida, and still keep their job or keep where they're working. But yet we'd lose the tax incentives to that. Back to Taxachusetts. Are we going to end up? Is that where we want to go and want to do with this?
So I hear you on this no guarantee, but we know that legislators have prioritized pretty consistently education, especially. I mean, if you look over the last 4 to 8 years, and transportation. Yeah. So, yes, there's no guarantee, as you argue, there's no guarantee that they will. But that also would mean the corollary is true, that there's no guarantee that they won't either.
$10 billion coming from the infrastructure bill that President Biden just sent into transportation here in Massachusetts. Another $10 billion in surplus money. The highest stabilization fund in history, $2.94 billion in overpaid taxes coming back to the people in the Commonwealth. Now is not the right time for this tax.
So let's talk about timing. We've just heard from Dan Sensi, who's spokesperson for No on Question 1. I'm turning now to Andrew Farnitano, who's the communications director for Yes on 1. Today, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren is holding a hearing expressing concern about our safety and management quality at the state level with the MBTA and public transportation. One of the things she argued in setting this up is there's a lot of money coming in for infrastructure and public transit. Can we be confident that the T and other parts of the state, Department of Public Utilities, are ready to spend that money appropriately? So what about the question of timing? Isn't there some concern that we aren't ready for another couple $1 billion influx?
Yeah. She also said that the workers at the T are under-resourced and overworked. And we are in this mess in the T because for years, opponents of the very rich paying their fair share have said, we need reform before revenue. We need a plan before we spend a single dollar. And over the last 2 decades, our infrastructure has continued to sink into disrepair. It's going to take more money to make things better. And we think that the very rich should pay their fair share to make those investments, not drivers paying more with the gas tax, not T riders paying more in fares, but those at the very top who have been the most successful and benefit the most from our strong economy.
Okay, and we are going to get into the fairness in a minute, but I've got 2 more things that I want to hit on in this area of intended and unintended consequences with the 2 of you. And I'm going to play a piece of sound here, again, from Evan Horowitz. I know we're going to him a lot, but he was our explainer on the show yesterday, and this is the center that did the analysis. So, there has been an argument that the no side has made that this would impact one-time millionaires. So people who in a given year have some event that creates income over $1 million, but aren't year over year what we tend to think of as a millionaire. Evan argued yesterday what that might look like. Here's that sound.
You're a dentist, and you've built up a practice, over 3 decades, and you're ready to retire, and you decide you're going to sell off the business. You're going to sell off your equipment or your client list, whatever it is. And in that year, you sell this business, you may make income of $4, $5, $6 million, and you'll pay the tax in that year. Having said that, in that year, they'll pay because they will have a giant windfall.
So short question to each of you. Dan Sensi, why not? It's $4, $5, $6 million. You're only going to pay it in the year that it happens. That is a lot of money, and we're talking about 4% over the million.
Sure.
So why not?
It's an 80% increase from where we are now. And I think that this will spill over when we're talking about fairness, too, as well. I think it's
we're going to go to fairness
next.
And
I think that this probably leads into it. So 50.5, over half of the people captured by this each year, it'll be the only time it happens in their life.
So 50.5, just percent?
Percent, yeah. Half of the people captured by this tax every year, it'll be unique to them. Well, they don't consider themselves millionaires.
So let me just stay with
that.
They
work their entire life.
One time.
Correct. Is that who we're going after with this? I thought we were going after the uber wealthy. I thought we had to have people pay their fair share who don't pay enough taxes. Okay. This is people who've worked their entire life for one single event that will be fund their nest egg, fund their retirement, fund their children's education, whatever it's going to fund. It's going to happen once.
So what about that?
That's not true. There's no source for that 50% number. It's
actually,
pulled from it's the Tufts report.
The analysis.
The Tufts report does not come up with that number themselves. They pull it from an anti-tax tax foundation report that based it on a period 2007 through 1997 through 2009 when we had 2 recessions happening in that period. So that number is out of date. It's not based in reality. More recent research shows it's only 15% of taxpayers. That's from Cristobal Young at Stanford University. And this is important. Those individuals who make an income over $1 million only once are only paying a tiny bit more. Someone who makes $1.1 million, which is a lot of money, is going to pay an extra $4,000. 90% of the money raised by question 1 will come from people who are making over $2 million a year. 70% of the revenue raised will come from people making over $5 million a year. Those are the super rich who will pay the most.
Okay, you're listening to a debate on ballot question 1, one of 4 ballot questions Massachusetts voters will weigh in on this election cycle. Here we have Andrew Farnitano, Communications Director for Yes on 1, and Dan Sensi, spokesperson for No on 1. Yes means We would create an additional 4% tax only on annual income over $1 million. No means we would keep the flat tax rate of 5% for everyone. Today's conversation is brought to you by WBUR, the Boston Globe, WCVB, and in addition to listening to this debate here on WBUR 90.9 FM, you can watch a video stream. You can go to WBUR.org, bostonglobe.com, or WCVB.com to watch. So, the third category, fairness. And I'm going to ask the same question to both of you. Dan, Sensi, how do you know what's fair?
How do you know what's fair? Well, that's kind of an existential question, don't you think, to that point?
But that's kind of where we are in the fairness argument with this initiative.
It's not for me to judge whether or not this was written appropriately or the language is correct or this is the correct vehicle. Educational funding, transportation investment are key facets to our community, to our economy. We should invest in them without question, without doubt. This amendment is fatally flawed. It captures too many people in the middle class. It's going to keep doing so for generations because it's a constitutional amendment. It will take years upon years to undo whatever is done here if we decide maybe that wasn't the right way to do it. It's going to take from the legislators what we vote for them to do and elect them to do, and I don't believe it's the right vehicle to do so. Mine and our coalition, which is made up of over 1,000 groups and individuals, of farmers, of small business owners, of large business owners, of individuals across the Commonwealth, are put together to oppose this language as is presented to ourselves today.
Okay, turning to Andrew Farnatano, and I want to note, you have an unfair advantage because you heard the question and Dad had to respond right away, and you had 60 seconds to think about it. So I want to note that. Yeah. How do you know what's fair?
Right now, people in Massachusetts virtually all of us pay more in taxes than those at the very top. That top 1%, they pay less of their income in state and local taxes than anyone else. And when you look at who's opposing this question, it's not the funding behind it is not the farmers and small business owners that Dan talks about. It is 5 billionaires, 5 of the wealthiest people in this state who are bankrolling the opposition to this question because they don't want to pay their fair share. They know what's at stake here, and we are fighting to make sure that they pay more.
Response?
Sure. Any of those folks who put in a significant amount of their personal money will tell you this is probably not going to affect their life very much in the immediacy. They're business owners here in the Commonwealth. They're concerned about their employees. They're concerned about the economy of the Commonwealth and what it's going to do. And they're concerned about the actual effects of what it will happen. And my counterpart failed to mention that they are supported mainly by 2 unions and union dues. And what's the ROI they're going to look to come back from this investment of over $20 million into this? I'd much rather us work together, put the $30 million spent, and find a way to really address these issues.
So I'm going to stay with the two of you. Coming back to you, Dan, with a little more sound from our conversation yesterday, breaking this down with Evan Horowitz for the Center for State Tax Policy. I'll make sure I got that state policy analysis, excuse me. And here he is talking about who's going to pay the roughly $1.3 billion that they're estimating will come from this.
Those 0.6% of households earn almost a quarter of all income in the state. So 0.6% of households earn between 20 and 25% of all the income earned by anybody in the state. And it's because of that inequality that this tax can raise any money at all from such a small pool of payers.
Is taxing a reasonable way to address inequality?
I don't believe so, because if you look across the country, those striations occur. That's just a natural state of our economy. And in Massachusetts, 50% of the residents here don't pay state income tax at all. And it's just relative to the high earners are the folks that pay the greater percentage of income tax, right? The most regressive tax is the sales tax or a property tax. And that's where you get a lot of the inequities and how folks pay much more of their percentage of their income tax. But we need hours to really unpack that into where we go, but that's what I come from.
Okay, and a little sound for you now, Andrew Farnatano. So taxing, creating a new tax with risk of families leaving the state, hiding money, questions of fairness as no is arguing it. Ultimately, Evan Horowitz told us that this would likely create meaningful but not transformative change. Here's that sound.
$1.3 billion is a lot of money, And if it's well targeted, it can do a lot of good on issues that people really care about, issues of educational attainment, issues of racial equity, issues around fixing our transit system. We all see what's going on with the T. What's implausible is fixing all these things with $1 billion. So a meaningful amount of money that will make a difference in people's lives if well targeted, but not a transformative amount of money.
So we're talking about amending the Constitution and changing the taxes for a small portion of our state versus something that works across the state. Is meaningful but not transformative change worth changing the state constitution?
Absolutely. We need to spend more money on these areas. I think everyone acknowledges that education and transportation need more investment. Opponents of question one want it to come from working people, paying more in sales tax or gas tax or these other regressive taxes that hit working and middle class people the most. We think those at the very, very top, that 0.6% of the population, less than 7 in every 1,000 people in our state who have been the most successful, made the most money, benefited the most from our economy, should pay a little bit more, just 4% on their second million and everything above it.
Are you arguing that it should come from working people?
This does come from working people. That's what I'm arguing. This is much more of a middle-class tax hike than ever intended. It's far more sweeping. Home sales, capital gains. We would have the highest capital gains in the country. Short-term capital gains, were this to be the case.
Remind our listeners why you argue this is not coming from working people.
I listened to Evan on the program yesterday. He agreed that home sales would not be affected. There was a study. 895 homes last year would have been affected and
right.
would
so
pay more.
That's homes being affected. Don't say not. I'm sorry to argue.
It was fewer than 1,000 phones. It was phones.
That's
fewer than
this
1,000
year.
homes.
If you look at Zillow, where we're standing right now, okay, if I were to throw a rock, every house that I would hit is worth more than $1 million.
And those would not pay more.
Regional.
Yes, they would if they're worth more than $1 million.
Okay.
No,
Everyone stop, because I'm almost at the end.
Sorry.
And I was here with Evan yesterday, so here is what he argued. That anybody who realized a sale of over $1 million and were not able to offset all of those additional proceeds would, in fact, pay more money on the sale of a house. That was a fairly small percentage of the houses in the housing stock. And that regionally that would be disproportionate because some communities have higher housing values than others. Listen, you both have so much more to say, but we have to be done. So I'm going to start to end us now by giving you each a chance to make kind of a one-sentence final pitch. Andrew Farnetano will have you go first.
This is the fairest, most progressive way to raise the revenue that we need to make investments in our schools and our roads and our transit, not from working people in the middle class, but from the very, very top, less than 0.6% of taxpayers who would pay a little bit more on their second million and everything above it.
Okay, Dan Sensi, a couple sentences for you.
Sure. Retirees, homeowners, small business owners, farmers, all make up our coalition. All don't consider themselves millionaires. All believe this is the wrong time for this tax increase, which will not guarantee to increase funding for transportation and education.
Okay, that concludes our debate on question one, which deals with the Fair Share Amendment, also called the Millionaire's Tax. Our debate is part of our continuing political coverage this election season and is brought to you by WBUR, the Boston Globe, and WCVB. You can rewatch this entire debate, as well as our debate on question 4 at WBUR.org, BostonGlobe.com, or WCVB.com. We were joined today by Andrew Farnetano, Communications Director for Yes on One, and Dan Sensi, spokesperson for No on One. Andrew, Dan, thank you both.
Thank you.
Great to have you both. And folks, don't forget to vote on November 8th. There's more ahead. I'm Tiziana Deering. You're listening to Radio Boston.